Hello, welcome back to our podcast, A Couple of Silmarils, where we are going through the Silmarillion written by J.R.R. Tolkien for the very first time, and then we just get on here and talk about it. In this episode, we are going into chapters 11, 12, and 13. We learn of the creation of the sun and the moon, the coming of men, and the return of the Noldor to Middle Earth. So it's going to be we're going to cover a lot. So anything before we head into it?
No, let's dive right in. There's a lot to cover.
Yes. And chapter 11, like I said, is about it's called Of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of the Valinor. So essentially this is how Tolkien explains how the sun and moon were created. So this chapter takes us back to the Valar. They're still sitting in their Ring of Doom. Remember, this is just their council room area. This isn't an actual ring. They were not idle, as Fëanor had said before, because the Valar can work with thought without using their hands or their bodies. They don't even have normal bodies. They just take on the shape of human or elf bodies so that we or the elves and the men can relate to them better. So anyway, they are sitting in their ring of doom. They are still mourning over the trees and the marring of Fëanor and the works of Melkor. Everything feels very dark and heavy. And so Manwë tells Yavanna and Nienna to put forth all their powers towards the trees to see if they can get them to grow again. If you remember, Ungoliant stabbed them, sucked all the light out of them, and they're dark and dying. Yavanna sings, and Nienna, she tries to put forth her tears, but it's almost like she kind of gets, it's too hard for her. She's too sad. And it ends up just being Yavanna singing alone in the shadows. And her hope is failing that she'll be able to actually get anything to grow. And right as her hope fails or falls, Telperion, one of the trees, gave one last leafless bow with one great flower of silver, and Laurelin did the same thing with a single fruit of gold.
Which is good because I was thinking of this when it comes down to like modern times when you get rid of something, you don't have your backup in the cloud, if you will. And so
Yeah.
The Silmarils was their backup in the cloud, and they lost that. So they really were trying to get the essence of the tree back.
Yeah, so Yavanna takes this, the flower and the fruit, and leaves the trees. They are dead now. They have lifeless trunks, and they still stand in Valar. The flower and the fruit Yavanna gave to Aule and Manwë, and they made vessels. They put them in vessels. Aule made the vessels. I believe Manwë hallowed the vessels to hold them, to preserve their radiance. The vessels were given to Varda. If you remember, Varda is kind of over the stars, so that she might put them as lamps in the heavens to outshine the stars. So they had an idea of where to put them. This way it could be near to Arda, and she gave them the power to move the lower regions of Ilmen. Ilmen to you is kind of the heavens, right? Is that how
That's what I got as well. Yeah, I was looking that up, and it seemed like this might be the only reference to it. And so, but yes, yeah, essentially the skies, the heavens, if you will. Yeah, stratosphere might be the technical term.
Yeah, and it's like the visible skies that you can see in all of Arda. She set them to voyage upon an appointed course. It says above the girdle of earth from the west to the east and to return. So you can you're starting to understand, one's silver, one's gold. You're trying to get the idea that Tolkien wants to have a reason for the sun and the moon that exists in the sky. And so this is the way that they were created.
And I think, and we'll get to it, but this obviously helps create time as well. So light,
yes,
and time,
days and nights.
yes, come into play a lot here too.
They also wanted to have some light because they knew that this light would hinder Melkor. And they remembered that the Avari, who are men, they haven't awakened yet, and they didn't want to forsake them. So if they put this light up in the sky, they're hoping that it would turn Melkor away and not have Melkor attacking the men right as they're awakened. So Manwë actually doesn't know the hour, but he just knows that it's coming soon and wants to protect the men. They named the moon Isil, the Sheen, and the sun is named Anar, the Fire Golden. The Valar choose to Maiar to take the sun and the moon up into the sky, essentially, and to be kind of its guide, to keep it going through its journey that it's supposed to be on. The Maya that was chosen to guide the sun is named Arian, and then the Maiar that was chosen to steer the moon is named Tilion. Do you have a comment?
No. I mean, I think this was a somewhat confusing section. I was not sure that Tolkien needed all this about the they have like a specific guardian of the sun and the moon. But no, nothing else past that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to understand the journey that they wanted it to take, but we'll talk about that in a second. The Noldor named the Rana is the sun, called the Wayward, and then the Heart of Fire was the sun, and Rana would have been, or Rhaena was the moon. So maybe we'll hear those a few more times, but I thought I'd put that in there. The moon, Isil, was finished first, and it made its journey. It was ready to go into the realm of the stars first. And so for a while, the world just had moonlight. And this thrilled the elves. They love the moon. The moon is them, essentially. They just think it's beautiful. Probably reminds them of the stars. It's a softer, more beautiful light. Morgoth, it just says Morgoth was amazed. I'm sure he's a little confused and doesn't quite know what it is, but he's not scared of it yet. So
we'll talk more in these chapters, but this is kind of more obviously the Valar's response to what he does. So he's not quite sure how they're going to respond. He knows he took their trees and he got away. But he knows that's not the end of things.
Yeah, I think he's seeing like something's happening. Yeah. The book just makes a point that this is the time that Fingolfin is making his march into Middle Earth. If you remember last episode, as Fingolfin came in to Middle Earth, it said the sun was shining. So he came in as the sun started shining, I believe.
Well, yeah, and him and his people were marching over the Helcaraxe, the small, very dangerous connection between the two continents in Arda. And so as they're marching in, some light comes too. So it's probably quite encouraging for them, honestly, after that journey over across the Helcaraxe.
Yeah. So the moon had traveled. It says it traveled the heavens 7 times before the sun was ready to be put in the sky. So we don't know what that means, was it 7 years? Was it 7 days? We don't know. But the sun did rise, and the first dawn of the sun was like a great fire upon the towers of the Pelori. And at this point, Morgoth was dismayed. This did really scare him, and he descended even further into the depths of Angband along with his army or orcs and things.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite the change of lifestyle there. It's the sun and the moon, and it's just like a huge a warming light too. And Morgoth, that's kind of when we start realizing that as you demon Lord of the Rings, as orcs don't like the sun and whatnot. This is kind of where Morgoth and the orcs figure that out, that they don't like the sun when they see the sun.
And you can see that in the other stories of Tolkien that. They did not like the sun. So it's clearly because it was part of the trees of light, I'm sure. I mean, the Silmarils hurt Morgoth, so it makes sense that the sun would really hurt him too and his people. The next part kind of talks about the journey of the sun and the moon. It was a little confusing to me. I wish I had like an example. I could like watch what the journeys of the sun and the moon were doing so I could like understand it a little bit more. So I'm going to just talk about that a little bit. Varda wanted the two vessels to journey in Ilmen, but not together. She wanted each to pass into the east and return, one from the west and the other turned from the east. So I'm assuming coming from opposite directions, and then they would pass each other is what that's.
I got the impression you never wanted to see both of them at the same time, so she didn't want them ever passing each other.
Okay. She
both,
wanted them to journey,
yeah,
but not together. It does say not together, so I think you read that right.
Yeah, well, because I think one of it says, and sometimes Tilion would be chasing the sun, and they'd both be in the sky together, and interesting things.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
I'll mention that actually. So the first of the new days had begun. After the manner of the trees, from the mingling of the lights, when Aryan and Tilion passed. So as when the sun and the moon, I guess they just mentioned that there was a light similar to the mingling of the trees, which created days, is what they were kind of saying. Tilion, like Ethan was saying, Tilion is the one who directs the moon. He was wayward and uncertain in speed, so he didn't stay on his appointed path. He always wanted to. He was very drawn to Aryan, the Maiar that took care of the sun, and so he was drawn to her splendor, but he got scorched by her. So it seems like he was kind of stupid. So he's always trying to catch up. And so kind of what Ethan was saying, they're not supposed to be close to each other. I mean, if you think of the sun and the moon. And so because of the waywardness of Tilion, and then it says because of the prayers of Lorien and Este, who kind of were saying that sleep and rest had been vanished from the earth and that the stars were hidden. So I feel like they were saying that the sun or the moon were hiding the stars. And so they wanted to allow a time where the world would still have shadow and half light. So Varda decided to allow this, mainly because Tilion was not listening to her anyways. So these are where it gets a little confusing. So the sun and the moon traveled around the earth. Anar was drawn down and went under the earth, and then came unseen to the east, and then mounted in the heavens again. Varda commanded the moon to journey in the same manner, passing under the earth and rise in the east, but only after the sun descended from heaven. Tilion still goes with an uncertain pace, and sometimes can be seen together, the sun and the moon, or sometimes Tilion comes so close that his shadow cuts off the sun's brightness.
Which I assume was an eclipse.
Yes, I did think about that. I was like, we recently had eclipse here where we live, and I was like, that's just Tilion trying to catch up to the sun, I guess.
Yeah, I think in Tolkien's universe, I believe the world is flat, and so basically the sun and the moon are just kind of disappearing out and coming back again. Is as best as I could put it together. I think we're a bit confused. I think the big concept of it, though, is time gets created and light gets created. But I think it seems like the moon is so bright you can't see the stars, and that's why we have that period of time that Varda allows, where
the half light.
Where that's kind of there.
Yeah, and even like Lorien and Este were saying that people weren't able to rest because it was too bright. So it's like a little bit of time where there's no moon and no sun.
I mean, if these folks have been living forever with no light, with only starlight in Middle Earth, and we start talking about elves other than the Sindar, the Grey Elves, who had Muriel to brighten the stars. There's a lot of other elves out there that did not have Muriel around to brighten the stars, so they're just simply starlight only is what they've existed on.
It would be pretty shocking. The sun is.
I mean, it was probably nice for them to see the moon just at first, because that light was bright enough, and then the sun. It's kind of the I don't know, the training period for your eyes.
Yes, the Valar was like. I mean,
then the sun comes.
The moon was they gradually got to the sun. So by the coming and going of Anar, or the sun, the Valar created the days that would remain until the change of the world. So now we have days, morning, evening. Now we have a time that is a bit shorter and goes a bit faster. Morgoth hated the new lights, like we said, and he was very confounded by them. He tried to attack Tilion, actually, and he sent spirits and shadows against him. I always forget, like, Morgoth, yeah, he can go into the heavens. He's a Valar. He can do what he wants. Sent some spirits and shadows against him. There was strife and ill-wind, but Tilion was victorious. Morgoth actually feared Aryan, the Maya that was protecting the sun, and so he wouldn't actually even get close to her. He would hide himself in shadows to keep away from the sun. So he tried to attack Tilion. Tilion was victorious. The Valar, though, this kind of made them have a lot of doubt. They were fearing the malice and the cunning of Morgoth. So they decided. So we know those mountains in
You could probably
Ahriman
pull up the map
that cover all of Ahriman. I'll pull up the map here in a second. The Pelori, that's what I'm trying to say. So here's the map. And real quick, I'll just point to the Pelori. So these are the Pelori mountains that just surround all of Valinor. And so they decide, the Valar decide to rise them up higher to scarier heights than they have ever been, essentially. So they their outer sides were dark and smooth without any folds or ledges, and they had a sleepless watch set up in the mountains, and no one could pass through except for the Kalakira. Do you know what the Kalakira are?
Well, the Kalakira is the passive light. If you turn that, if you put the map back on, I had one other comment on that too. So if you see right here, this passive light, that is the. Is it the Kalakira? I feel like we might be missing a syllable on that. But that's essentially where the Talari came over and they created the passive light, why they stayed on Tolaresia. So they decided that's the only place you can enter Valinor really at the mountain. So they didn't put anything there. So they did put a lot of guards and sentinels there, but they didn't like close it off with mountains. And another thing they mentioned is see this chain of islands. This is when they built this chain of islands here as well, as kind of a defense. But Tolkien does note in here it was never necessary because the servants of evil hate the sea, so they were never going to attack by the sea.
Yeah, so very interesting. They didn't completely close that path, like Ethan said, because the Eldar, they were faithful. There was still the Noldor as well, and all of the elves that lived in Aman needed to breathe the air from the land. So if you remember, they need the air from Middle Earth and the light. And they didn't want to forget about the Teleri who were living on that island that we mentioned. And then they talk about the Enchanted Isle. So Ethan just mentioned those on that map. The Enchanted Isles were set in that time, and all about them were filled with shadows and the bewilderment. These isles were strung as a net in the shadowy seas from the north to the south. Hardly any vessel could pass between them. It mentions if any mariners, anybody in a boat came, they would get very wary, and they would want to stop at the island. But if they got on that island, they would fall asleep for the rest of time. So that came about that as Mandos foretold, in Ahriman, the blessed realm was shut against the Noldor. So Mandos had foretold that earlier, and this is kind of how that happens. The Noldor won't be able to get back. No messengers sailed into the west and came ever to Valinor, save one only, the mightiest mariner of song. And I don't know who that is. Maybe we will find out.
Maybe we will. My first guess is Círdan, the shipwright.
Yeah.
Who's been introduced somewhat, but I don't know if he was the mariner or really like a really good shipbuilder. I don't know enough about him, so maybe he is or maybe he's not.
Yes, we'll have to keep that in our heads. So this ends chapter 11, and now we know how the sun and moon were created, sort of. We know how they're created. We're a little confused on their journeys up into the skies. But other than that, that's what chapter 11 has for us. Did you have any inputs on that?
Yeah, I guess a couple things maybe I could have mentioned a bit earlier, just noting that the Valar, as they're sitting around their ring of doom, they're very dismayed. It's a big crush that Fëanor kind of was corrupted because they realized how powerful and special he was, and so they were almost as sad, or even more sad about Fëanor being corrupted than the trees themselves being destroyed. And that was very interesting. I didn't know they felt that way about him. And so they said, the songs of the Noldor would be dear bought. That they because Fëanor's like, well, we're gonna do great things, and I said, well, maybe you will. They're gonna be dear bought, but they'll be well bought, and so they will. So they got a little bit of hope that the Noldor will accomplish some great things against darkness while they are over in Middle Earth. And then one interesting thing to note too is that as time was created, everything started to grow much
Oh yeah, I
faster.
forgot to mention
It
that.
alluded that people repopulated much quicker, or elves repopulated much quicker, and things like that. Like the species grew a lot more, trees, flowers, a lot of things that a lot of particularly flowers and things that that Yavanna would have made started growing that did not grow before they had the sun and the moon.
Yeah,
So
I
like Middle Earth
remember.
changes quite a bit.
I remember in one of the first chapters it said that the birds weren't singing and the flowers weren't blooming or something like that. And now I feel like that's happening because the sun is out.
Yeah.
At least the flowers blooming.
And then I think now that we have sun and moon, that leads us well into chapter 12, which is
Of men. It's called Of Men.
it's
So
time for the Atani. Now, I think you called them Avari earlier. That's Atani
oh, thank you.
to make their appearance.
Yes, time for the men to show up. The days are were reckoned forth. It's called the years of the sun. And we mentioned this in the other chapter, but this is kind of how this chapter starts, that the days are swifter and briefer than any of the years of the trees in Valinor. The air became heavy with the breath of growth and mortality. The changing and aging of all things hasten exceedingly. So it's kind of very much leading up to like this kind of men are mortal. The Eldar increased, and beneath the new sun, Beleriand grew green and fair. So all the things are blooming at the first rising of the sun. So when Aryan goes up into Ilmen with the sun, the younger children of Iluvatar awoke in the land of Hildorian, the eastern regions of Middle Earth. So they are awake.
Do you want to pull up the map on that?
Sure.
They are the Quivienen is up here where the elves first woke up, and then down to the south is Hildorian, and that's where mankind started to wake up. Perfect. And that is east of Mordor, because on this map, what I like is you can see Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth, and so you can see that's east of Mordor, probably more like where the evil men actually stayed around and have their homes. That's a long way out.
Yeah, pretty far away from where all of the Beleriand elves are right now. The Valar did not come to guide them and to summon them into Valinor. Doesn't really say why. The men actually fear the Valar than loving them. And they did not understand their purposes or their powers. Ulmo comes and because he takes thought of them, he wants to kind of take care of them. And Manwë counsels him too as well. And so he sends messages through streams and floods. The men, they love the waters and their hearts are stirred by these messages, but they do not understand them.
Right over the head.
No clue.
I don't know what's going on here.
So how I read it is like the Valar are... the Valar and the men don't know how to relate to each other. They need to figure out ways to communicate a little bit better. They meet the Dark Elves in many places and were befriended by them. They become companions and disciples in their childhood with these ancient folks.
And the Dark Elves would be the Morikwendi. They would be the ones that, well, pretty much anyone that kind of stayed. The Dark Elves would be kind of the ones that did not leave for the journey of the Eldar.
And they didn't leave at all. Like they stayed at
and that would be Quivienen, so they would be up around there as well. So the Sindar would be part of the Gray Elves. I guess they would still be called Morikwendi as well. But these would be the Avari, I think is what they're referring to. And the Avari are specifically the elves that said we are not even going to start to go to Valinor, as opposed to some of the others that started.
Yeah, and it mentions that at this point too, it's been so long that they know the Valar as a rumor and a distant name. So they aren't even like. The Valar are so far removed from them because they haven't really interacted with them for so long. Which is
interesting that Orome doesn't ever make it over there. It seems like stops going over to that side of the world. Because we get mentioned here that Ulmo is around the men. And so they kind of have a little bit of a sense of the Valar. But these other elves, it seems like the Valar stopped going to them.
Yeah. It does mention that Morgoth, because of the sun, he isn't really coming out. So there's little peril in the lands, which is good for the men, the children of men, to spread west, north, and south, and they wandered and had great joy. The curse of Morgoth and the oath of Fëanor, they were at work. So only a part of this is told in the deeds of those days. Kind of interesting how short this chapter is of the coming of men, just because this story is clearly more about elves, because I feel like they didn't give as much detail as I kind of wanted them to. So most is told of the Noldor and the Silmarils, and the morals that become entangled in their fate is what the book says. So elves and men were of like stature and strength in those days, but the elves had greater wisdom and skill and beauty. And then only in the realm of Doriath, whose queen was Melian, as we know, was the kindred of the Valar, did the Sindar come near to match the Calaquendi of the Blessed Realm. That's just kind of how that paragraph ended. So it's not really saying too much about the men. It keeps just kind of talking about their differences between the elves.
I thought was funny. Some of their names the elves had for men. Let's see, usurpers, the sickly, and children of the sun. I think there's a couple more I didn't write down, but
it's kind of like their names for the dwarves, the stunted men or something.
Stunted men or stoneworkers, I think is what they had for the dwarves. Yeah, they do mention Elrond become at the end of this chapter, and I think that's because Elrond had a parent that was a man with the children of men.
Yeah, so I guess the things they said about the elves and the men, they said that the elves, obviously we know they are immortal, they're very wise, they had no sickness, their bodies were stuff of the earth, they could be destroyed in those days, and were more like the bodies of men, but men were frail. They were more easily slain and easily healed, and less easily healed, obviously, and they got sick easier and grew old and died. The elves did not know where their spirits went, which is interesting comment that was made in this chapter. They don't know where they go. Some believe that they go to a place of waiting that is not of the elves, and only probably maybe Mandos knows and Iluvatar know where they go. None have ever come back from the dead. No man has ever come back from the dead, save for Beren, son of Barahir, because he touched a Silmaril.
And we're assuming we're going to get that story later.
I hope so,
because we don't know about that yet.
But he never speaks of it to mortal men, so we still don't find out when men die where they go. The fate of men after death was not even told in the music of the Ainur, so the Valar don't even know. So we're, like we said, maybe Mandos knows because he's like the one where when the elves die, go to his halls, but other than that, don't know what happens to men when they die.
And one important thing to note here too is, like, it doesn't say a lot about men, but what we do know is that the Noldor particularly are very, thanks to Fëanor, are very suspicious of man and think the Valar love men more than them, and that's why they don't really care about them, the Noldor. They just want them to go. Is what the lies Fëanor spread to them. So
yeah, that's kind of how Fëanor started.
You see men and elves start to interact, like, it's particularly Noldor's. Like, oh, they do not trust us at all.
Yeah, I feel it's how Fëanor got them to start distrusting the Valar. Was like, look, the men are coming and they care more about the men. This chapter just kind of ends. It just says that men and elves were allies, and they were the men liked to learn the wisdom of the Eldar and some became great, valiant captains among some of the Noldor, and in the glory and the beauty of their elves of the elves, and in their fate, full share the offspring of elf and mortal, Arendil and Elwing and Elrond, their child. So I'm assuming they're saying which one's the human of the man. Do you know?
For Elrond,
Arendil or Elwing?
I think. I actually don't know. I was thinking the same thing, and I could have looked it up, and I did not.
We probably could look it up right now. But
I assume we'll be introduced to them later, but I don't remember which one is the the mortal. Which one's the male or the female there, too? Yeah,
so they're essentially saying that they some of them married each other, and so we get Elrond. This is the end of chapter 12 of Men. This is because this is more of a story of elves, like we mentioned, there's not as much told about men. So that's kind of all we get.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe later on. I mean, they mentioned Baron and Luthien, so
I'm sure there's some of the mightiest men come into the story, but it's not going to be.
Yeah.
All right, so that takes us to the last chapter. We're going to go through the largest chapter, chapter 13. So we're going back to the Noldor. It's called Of the Return of the Noldor. If we remember, Fëanor is taking his people into back to Middle Earth, away from the Valar. We start with Fëanor. They when they arrive in Middle Earth, if you remember, they land in the Waste of Lamath. It's over here, right? They kind of came in here.
There's the Firth, and then Lamoth, and then Losgar is where they burnt the ships.
Yeah, so they came in right here. That's where we ended last time when we were in the last episode. And they had when they set forth, their cries were taken up into the hills and multiplied. So the clamor of many mighty voices filled the coast of the north, and the noise of burning ships of Losgar went down in the winds of the sea in a tumult of great wrath. The flames of the boats were seen. Actually, Fingolfin saw them, whom Fëanor had deserted, but also by the orcs and the Watchers of Morgoth. So, obviously, we knew Fingolfin saw them because that's when he knew he had been deserted by Fëanor. But now Morgoth knows that Fëanor is. I don't know if he knows it's Fëanor, but he knows that there are people coming into Middle Earth from the Valar.
Yeah, I had never thought of it from that perspective too. Like, you just think of it initially from Fingolfin's people seeing it get burnt, but there's other people in Middle Earth that see what is going on here. All these ships on fire.
Yeah, they came in, and they came into the Firth of Drengus that we just pointed out, into the land of Hithlum, which we'll point out in a second, and they make their camp along the northern shores of the Lake of Mithram. So let's pull up that Beleriand map again, and you can see Hithlum here. Mithram is down here, and do you see the lake?
Yeah, that's right. It's just north of where it says.
Oh, there's a lake.
Yeah.
So they're on the northern shore of this lake right here. This is where they decide to make their camp. And that's that area is kind of where they stay for a while. So it's helpful to know where that is. And if you are listening to this, we mentioned in the last episode that these chapters, it's just really helpful to look at a map. So if you wanted to watch us on YouTube, you can see the maps that we're pulling up, and it just helps us understand where they are and how they're moving in Middle Earth.
And there's so many different names. Sometimes you don't have to remember the name. You just kind of have to remember where it is on the map, and that's helpful.
So Morgoth sees the burning ships and those loud cries, like we mentioned, and he decides to assail Fëanor. And their camp, before their camp was fully set up. So the Noldor were very much outnumbered, and they were taken by unaware, and they were actually very victorious. And the reason that the book mentions that they were victorious is that they had just come from Aman. So the light of Aman was still in their eyes. They still had a lot of the elves that were in Aman. They had a lot of the strength of the Valar in them, and so they were a lot stronger than the orcs. So they were able to defeat. So this is Fëanor's first battle. They were also very angered and deadly. And so the orcs fled and were driven from Mithram, and they hunted them all over the mountains into the great plain of Ard Galen. Morgoth was dismayed by these tidings, obviously, and the battle lasted 10 days, but barely any orcs returned back to Morgoth. So this was Morgoth's not first interaction with Fëanor, but he had just killed his father, and so Fëanor was kind of able to come in and defeat him.
I think Fëanor was pretty happy
on his land.
How quickly he found Morgoth's soldiers after he had just convinced his people to abandon Aman and come on over, so it's like, well, now we got to find him. But Morgoth finds Fëanor. I think he's happy enough with that because he lusted for battle.
Yeah, and so talk about the lust. What does Fëanor do after this battle?
So Fëanor is like, we won. Let's go take Angband. And remember, the Valar defeated Angband the first time after a long fight, and they themselves didn't even clear it all out. So he immediately takes all his army, all his people, and said, "We're going to go attack the mighty fortress of Morgoth."
Yeah. So he, in his pride, decides that he can take on Angband.
And remember,
Essentially,
he's gotten rid of Fingolfin's forces. This is everyone that came on the ships with him specifically, that were already loyalists. So they don't give the number of his army, but this is not the whole host of the elves in any shape
no.
or form.
This is
And
just
he is in lust/arrogance attacking. Decides to go. I came to kill Morgoth, and here I go right now.
yeah, and he kind of gets in front of, they call it the van of the army, and Morgoth sees him coming, and he calls the Balrogs to aid him. So Fëanor is fighting at the gates of Angband in front of his army, and he is fighting a Balrog, and we'll pull up where he is right now.
Here's the plains in front of Angband. So he's somewhere in here is where the battle's taking place. He would have marched over from Mithrim. Probably somewhere here is where probably somewhere in here is where this battle is taking place right there.
And so Gothmog is the name of the Balrog he is fighting. Gothmog does wound him, and he is on the ground, and he would have died, but his sons came to his aid, and the Balrog left him, which is interesting. He just left and departed to Angband. So Fëanor is very wounded, and his sons are bringing him back towards Mithrim. So they're trying to get him back to their camp. And Fëanor tells him to halt because he knows that he is dying, which is so shocking to us as we were reading this, that like Fëanor is dying. Whoa. His wounds were mortal, and he knew that his hour was coming. And so he cursed the name of Morgoth, and he told his sons to keep their oath that they had made. And then he died. And what happened to his body?
His spirit goes to the halls of Mandos, is what it says.
Yeah, there was no funeral. There was no body. His spirit just kind of goes into, it says, his spirit was so fiery that as it sped, his body fell to ash and was borne away like smoke.
But Tolkien kills Fëanor. We were completely shocked by this.
We were. Like, it was just like,
wait,
boom.
He's dead? Like, I thought this was all going to go around to him in some final battle at the end. But for as powerful a character as he was his last few chapters, he is gone. And that really surprised me. The maker of the Silmarils is dead.
Yeah, he died. And so I guess I felt like the book set Fëanor up as just like he's going to play this huge part. And I do think he did. The Silmarils, literally the name of the book. So that's a big part to play in this book. But I just felt like he was going to last longer. But he doesn't. It's interesting. No. The book goes on to talk about the Grey Elves that dwell in Mithrim. If you remember, that's where Fëanor and his people had made their camp. And the Noldor met with them with gladness. They had a hard time speaking, but in the end, they did learn the Grey Elves language more so than the language that they had spoken in Valar. They learned from these elves about Thingol. If you remember, we talked a lot about Thingol in the last episode. He's down in Doriath, and the girdle of enchantment that's around his realm. No one can go in and out without his approval. And the tidings of the Noldor's arrival did make it all the way to Doriath. And all of Beleriand were filled with wonder and hope with the coming of their kindred. It's interesting. They don't know why they came. They don't know that they were kind of banished. But they do know that they're here, and they kind of feel like they're here maybe to help them and aid them in the war with Morgoth.
And that they assume they're emissaries of the Valar. Or I think maybe the Noldor said they were.
Yeah, like they were sent.
And at this point, you don't really have death. At least you don't have elves killing each other, and so probably don't have a reason to not believe them at this point. And all the terrible things that had happened. And then I think they introduced him to Thingol because that's the most, as a last episode, leader of the Grey Elves married Maiar, Melian, and so the most secure kingdom and probably most
Yeah, he's kind of
prosperous
the king of Beleriand,
and
sort of what people
mighty
listen
and the
to.
mightiest fortress there. So he's kind of the power that they're coming into.
Yeah, so after the battle and Fëanor dies, Morgoth comes to Fëanor's sons and acknowledges his death and starts offering terms of to even surrender a Silmaril. And thankfully, Maedhros, the oldest son, who seems to be very wise and not as proud and arrogant as his father, he persuades his brothers to not deal with Morgoth and let's just go to battle and fight him instead of, because they essentially, Maedhros knows if you deal with him, he's gonna go back on his word. He's gonna be like, haha, I killed you all and now I have all the Silmarils too. So there's another battle, and it specifically says that each army came with more force than they said they were going to, and so Morgoth did bring the Balrogs.
Well, it was like this is going to be a negotiation, but both sides knew it wasn't a negotiation, so they brought very large bodyguard army, which is just Morgoth brought an army and they brought an army. It just ended up being a battle.
Yeah, Maedhros was ambushed and his entire company was slain, except for him. And he was taken alive by the command of Morgoth and brought to Angband. So he became a prisoner of war essentially, and he is taken to Angband. Sounds terrifying, and he's held there. So Morgoth does not kill him. So the brothers of Maedhros, they retreat because their brother has been taken. Morgoth sent word that he would not release Maedhros unless the Noldor would forsake their war. Of course, the sons of Fëanor knew that Morgoth would betray them, and so they definitely said
and they were
no
bound to
that.
an oath too. So I don't think they were going to be able to, in good conscience, forsake that anyway.
Yeah, the oath wouldn't let them. I don't think any of the sons would have been like that. I think they even knew that's not what Maedhros would even want either. So they get news that someone is making this trek across the ice towards Hithlum. Fingolfin is coming. They are all very shocked because that's a hard journey and they wouldn't even do that
and
journey.
They left him. They left him in Amon and said, peace out.
And he had the guts to come. And it says, Fingolfin entered into Mithrim as the sun rose flaming in the west. I'm assuming when this is the first sun that rose, but I don't know.
That's quite an entrance.
He unfurled his blue and silver banners, and flowers sprang beneath his marching feet, and the ages of the stars were ended. So he literally came in as the sun goes up into the sky.
What an epic entrance. We have just crossed the Helcaraxe. The sun is here, and man, you left us, and we are back.
Yeah, and so it's a little confusing. They go through Dor-Dalath. Morgoth is fleeing back to Angband, and Fingolfin passes through Dor-Dalath unopposed by the enemy. They came to the gates of Angband and challenged with their trumpets. Maedhros heard the trumpet, but his cries were drowned out by the echoes of stone. So they came all the way up through here.
Yeah, there it is, Dor-Dalath.
And they're right here at the entrance.
So they go right to
Angband, which was surprising to me, knowing Fingolfin is just a little bit different than Fëanor. But so Fingolfin is wary of the wiles of Morgoth and does decide to withdraw before they start a war. And
he sees how powerful Angband is, so he believes he cannot take it by siege.
So yeah, they went to Mithrim, which is interesting. That's where Fëanor is. And so they go to Mithrim. He knew he would find the sons of Fëanor there. He made his first camp on the northern shores of Lake Mithrim. And as you can assume, there was no love in the hearts of Fingolfin's people towards Fëanor's people because of what they had done and left them without the ships. And they had to make that journey. And people died on that journey because it was so hard. So Fëanor's people kind of withdrew, which I thought was interesting, probably in their shame. They withdrew in their shame and they went to the southern end of the lake. So they had a whole lake separating them at this point.
But they both camp in Mithrim.
But they're both at the same place. They're both in Mithrim. And it does mention that some of the people of Fëanor, they did have a lot of shame and they did feel bad for what happened, but they repented
of the burning of Lost Scar is what I had. So many of them did.
Yes, but they were too they dare not say anything because they were afraid that they would get shamed by
Fëanor's sons.
the sons of Fëanor. So Morgoth does hear of this division, and he is very pleased of the division, and he sends smokes and vapors from the Iron Mountains over to Mithrim.
And this is to shadow his troops. His first attempt to shadow his troops from the sun.
And the wind came and bore them over Hithlum. It darkened and it laid upon the waters of Mithrim. So just kind of saying that's a little shadowy and dark over there. Like it is in this room right now, because the sun is going down. So that's why it's getting darker in here. So Fingon, who is the son of Fingolfin, he decides that he wants to heal this division, because obviously you can work better together if you are wanting to fight the same enemy. He decides that he wants to save Maedhros. So, Maedhros is an Angband right now. He's being held captive. It does mention that Fingon and Maedhros were really close friends back in Ahriman. And so he remembers that, and he does. Amon, thank you. And he remembers that, and he decides that without asking anyone or telling anyone, that he is going to go to Angband, and he is going to use actually the smoke that Morgoth sent to keep him hidden so he can make it to Angband without being seen by his enemies. So he climbs Thangordrim over here.
Yeah, and I believe kind of this whole surrounding area might be Thangordrim. They talk about a lot of the Thangordrim are mighty towers, and so
and mountains.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So this is kind of like the outskirts of Angband.
He climbs Thangordrim, which I can only imagine how hard that was. He could not find a passage or a crevice to get to Maedhros, and so he starts to sing a song of Valinor. And he pulls out his. Did he pull out an instrument?
I thought he did.
A harp? I thought it was a harp.
A lute, maybe, is what they said.
I was like, a harp would be so big, but maybe it was a lute is a smaller harp, right?
Well, it's a little bit closer to a banjo type.
Yeah, it has strings. So he starts singing, and as he's singing, he can hear a voice above him sing, and it is Maedhros. So he has found him, and he climbs to the foot of the precipice where Maedhros is, and he can't get to Maedhros. And so he cries.
So did you tell him how? So when Morgoth captured him, he basically chains him by his wrist and puts him on the side of a mountain to just hang by one wrist for, I don't know, hundreds of years. I don't know how long how long. I
feel like your arm would fall off.
Yeah. So that's where Maedhros is in a cold, stormy mountain, hanging by one wrist for a long period of time at this point.
And so he is dismayed, Maedhros is, and he's just like, kill me with your bow. I don't want to live like this any longer, which you can only imagine how much pain he was in. And Fingon decides to listen to him, but as he is pulling the bow, he calls out to Manwë, and he says, O king to whom all birds are dear, speed now this feathered shaft, and recall some pity for the Noldor in their need. And his prayer was answered quickly. How was his prayer answered?
So Manwë had already planned for some eagles to be in Middle-earth to help keep an eye on things, and so one of the Lord of the Eagles came over and took Fëanor, or not Fëanor, Fingon over there to be with Maedhros.
Yeah, he's able to put him on the precipice, and he gets there and he realizes he can't get Maedhros's hands free. So once again, Maedhros is asking him, just kill me now. But Fingon would have none of that, and he cut his hand off. So he could be, which was a good idea, cut his hand off so he could be released, and the eagle brought Maedhros and Fingon back to Mithrim. And
it appears Maedhros's hand grows back.
I didn't read that.
Elves heal quite well, and it mentions it healed fully, and he was able to use his sword again with that hand. It healed better than before, and he became a left-handed person. I can't quite remember everything, but it seemed like it healed fully.
He was recovered, but it does say that there was a shadow of pain in his heart. And what Fingon did in saving Maedhros did end up healing the hatred between the houses of Fingolfin and Fëanor. There obviously were some people that were not going to, their hearts weren't going to be softened as quickly, but most of that was healed. Maedhros begged forgiveness for the desertion in Armon. He waived his claim as king and gave it to Fingolfin because Fingolfin is older than him and is the rightful heir of the Noldorians. And some of Maedhros' brothers, probably who had more of a personality of his father, Fëanor, didn't love this, but they didn't push back. They just didn't agree with it. And at this point, the Noldor know that Morgoth is here to continue being at war with them. So they put a watch on the borders of Dor Daedalus right here.
Yeah, so basically they just keep them pinned in.
So they're here. They're putting a watch right here.
Well, probably more closer up there. Yeah.
Probably all around.
Yep.
Here.
Yep.
Okay. Thingol does not open his kingdom to the Noldor elves. He only allows Finarfin into his house and to pass into Doriath because his mother, Eärwen, was Olwe's daughter. And if you remember, Olwe is Thingol's younger brother. So there's a family connection there.
Yeah, they're related.
We just turned on a light because this took way too long. This episode's taking longer than we thought, and the sun is going down.
So the sun is now up in Middle Earth. We've got the first glow.
Yeah, the sun has risen. So we're back. This is funny. I'm very bright now. So we're talking about Thingol. Thingol only allows Finarfin to come in because of familial ties. Angrod is the son of Finarfin, and he was the first to come to Menegroth, and he told Thingol all the deeds of the Noldor.
And Menegroth is the capital of Thingol's kingdom.
Yeah, that's where Thingol lives, Thingol and Melian. He tells them the deeds of the Noldor in the north, not of why they came or anything like that, just of what they were doing in the north and helping that on the war of Morgoth. He tells Angrod to tell the Noldor that they could stay and dwell in Hithlum and in the highlands of Dorthonion and in the lands east of Doriath, and that were empty and wild, but they were none allowed to dwell in Doriath. So he was not willing to open his kingdom.
He sets the terms. He's like, oh great, my kinsmen are back, but I don't want you to take everything from me. Here's where you can stay. But
yeah, he still wants to be king.
Like, I've stayed here for 3,000 plus years, whatever time means, and so I get to choose.
Yeah. So Angrod brings us back to the Noldor elves, and of course Fëanor's sons were not happy with this because they probably felt like they should be the king. But I love what Maedhros said. He's like, he's a king, and in order to hold his title, he would be in vain if he wouldn't tell people where to dwell. And so he's the king, and we're going to listen to him. So I thought that was really wise. Caranthur, I don't know if that's how you say it, but he is probably the brother of, or the son of Fëanor that's the most like Fëanor. He's the harshest and the angriest. He's not thrilled that the sons of Finarfin were the messengers. And obviously that makes Angrod unhappy. And Maedhros rebukes Caranthur. And in the end, the Noldor are kind of troubled by this. And Maedhros just makes the decision to kind of have his brothers keep watch on the hill of Himring to kind of keep us in a separation between Fingolfin's people and Fëanor's people, so that they could keep what they've healed together and just keep people separated. So the hill of Himring is way over. Where did you say? Somewhere over here. Where did you say?
Yeah, right there. You have it. You're right on there.
Oh, right here. And so there, this is Mithrim. They're all the way over here. Does mention that
so you can tell the people are spreading out a little bit.
Yes. And Caranthur, that brother that's the angriest, and his people, they do dwell the furthest east beyond the upper waters of the Gellion, and they climbed Ered Luin, and they actually came upon the dwarves. The dwarves, it seems kind of like the dwarves and Caranthur and his people have kind of a similar personality. There wasn't a ton of love between them, but they realized they both hated Morgoth.
And they make money together.
And they like making money. And so the dwarves began the journey into Beleriand again. All the traffic passed through the hands of Caranthur, and so he was made very rich by the dwarves coming in and out. So they weren't they weren't friends, but they were partners and they were able to work together. 20 years later, there's this great feast that was thrown near the pools of Ivrin, and it was called the Feast of Reuniting. And that's because a lot of the people of the elves from all around came. People of Fingolfin, Finrod came, Mydros and Maglor came to represent Fëanor. There was a great number of gray elves with Círdan, their lord. The green elves came from Assyrian, and there were 2 messengers from Doriath, Mablung and Dairon.
I think it's interesting to note that the only messengers came from Dorian. Like Thingol is already they're already kind of separate from the Eldar.
Yeah,
I guess they would be part of the Eldar too, because they started the journey. But they're already separate from the folks that have returned from Valinor.
They said that they mostly spoke the tongue of the Grey Elves. This made the hearts of Noldor very high and full, and they kind of felt like they were fulfilling some of what Fëanor was seeking with the freedom in Middle Earth. There was joy and beneath the sun and the moon, but there was a shadow brooding. So they haven't fulfilled the oath, obviously. They hadn't fulfilled the oath, obviously, but they were feeling some of this freedom where they were not under the Valar, and they were kind of creating their own culture and land and building their buildings and things like that. So that's 20 years later, and then it says 30.
Which is helpful. It starts talking in terms of years. Just side note.
Yes, years are happening. 30 years later, Turgon, son of Fingolfin, leaves Neverest to seek out his friend Finrod upon the island of Tol Sirion. And they journeyed south along the river. This is a very interesting little blip in the book.
They do a guy's trip. It's like they have a little guy's trip.
Yeah, and Olmo comes to both of them and puts them both into a deep sleep. Both of them think that Olmo only came to them, and so they don't realize.
Yeah, they don't talk about it.
And they don't talk about it. And
they have dreams, yeah.
So they're kind of troubled by this dream, and they were always wandering alone in uncharted lands, looking for places of hidden strength. So I feel like Olmo is trying to get them to find where they're going to make their cities or their...
He's encouraging them to build fortresses. He's like, this peace won't last forever. You guys need to be prepared.
Yeah, they don't really go into specifics of what the dream was, but that's how, once we get through the rest of the chapter, it'll make sense. And that's kind of why we think that's probably what the dreams were about, kind of pushing them to find places where they could
or letting them know it was
withhold against.
It was going to be a scary time. Scary times are coming, and so are you ready?
Yeah. Finrod and his sister Galadriel. Is that correct? I think that's correct.
Let's see here. They're sons of Fëanor. She's Finarfin's daughter.
Yeah, I think Finrod.
Is Finarfin's daughter too?
Yeah.
Okay. His son.
You can Google it if you want.
All right.
Finrod and his sister Galadriel were guests of Thingol. Remember, we said they had some familial ties to Thingol's brother Olwe, and so that's why they were allowed to come into the majesty of Minegroth. Finrod loved Minegroth, and so with Olmo telling him he needed to find somewhere to build his fortress, he starts seeing as Minegroth as something that he would like his fortress to look like.
Yes, Finrod and Galadriel were brother and sister.
Yes, we have confirmed Finrod and Galadriel are siblings. Thingol is actually super kind to Finrod here, I feel like. He tells him of the river Narog and caves that were under, called the High Feroth, and he gives Finrod guides and takes him to this place, and Finrod decides to build here. This is where because it's pretty similar to Minegroth. It's very similar in terms of how he wants to build it, and they build deep halls and armories and mansions in the caverns of Narog, and the stronghold was called Nargothrond, and that is on the map, I believe. Right?
Yeah, I believe it's down here. There's Nargothrond right there.
Down here. So he's this is where Minegroth is, and he's come down here and built his pretty similar to what Minegroth looks like, of the caves and kind of down under. Finrod was aided by the dwarves in the building of his deep halls and mansions, and they were rewarded very well. He had brought them the most wealth from Valinor. He had brought the most wealth from Valinor from the east, so he had a lot of wealth to give to the dwarves. And the dwarves end up making Finrod a necklace, and it's called Now Glamir, and it was made of gold and gems, and they were set that were set from Valinor. So the gems were the ones that Finrod had given them, and he makes them a necklace. The necklace had a power where it was probably pretty heavy if you think about all the gems that were on it, but the power was that it felt very light on the person's neck. And I think it mentioned it was as light as a piece of twine. So it rested very lightly on the wearer. Galadriel did not go to Finrod to Nagrathond because she was in love.
She met Celeborn.
She meets Celeborn, the kinsman of Thingol, and she stays in Thingol's kingdom. She seems to really like Melian, and she learns a lot from Melian and likes to learn great lore and wisdom from her.
Which kind of makes sense because in the Lord of the Rings, she's somewhat of a semi-spiritual being, and then Melian would be have been a spiritual being, being a Maiar. Mm-hmm. So those characteristics and living in Doriath, the forest, for a while, that kind of makes sense as to who she became.
Yeah, I think so too. It makes sense why she's so wise, because she learned a lot from a Maiar.
Yeah.
So that's Finrod. Finrod, was called by Ulmo to find his fortress. And then the other elf that Ulmo met was Turgon. And Turgon really missed Tirion. If you remember, Tirion is where the Noldor elves lived when they were in Amon. And so he really misses Tirion, and he did not find a place anywhere that looked like Tirion. And so he returned to Nevrast, and Ulmo actually came to him again and told him to go alone to the Vale of Sirion. And he discovered a hidden Vale of Tumladen in the encircling mountains. He found a hill of stone, and he returns to Nevrast. He doesn't really tell anybody about it, but he starts secretly planning to come up with a plan to build a city there after the manner of Tirion. So Ulmo kind of helps him find the place he was searching.
Seemed like Finrod had been like, oh, I found what I'm going to do. I'm going to start building. And Turgon
need a little bit more help.
He kind of gave up. He's like, that was just a bad dream. He kind of started chilling again. I think Ulmo, it seemed like hey, let me show you someplace. And then that helped Turgon, like, this is a good place to build a safe city.
Can you show us on the map where that is?
Yes, that's not. It's going to be right here. It's going to end up being the city of Gondolin.
Right here.
Yep. So it's in this little area.
So it's a little bit closer to Doriath.
It is. I also wonder why Thingol, if Thingol had a secret reason for wanting the elves to fortify the other place, Nargothrond. I don't know why though, because he told Finrod go build here, but I don't know if he wasn't expecting attacks from the west. I don't think so. I was a little confused by that, like if he had a hidden agenda behind.
Yeah, why does Ulmo
go
want this
down to the south? Not Ulmo, Thingol, when he gives Finrod the instructions of where to build.
Oh, to Nargothrond.
And then, but it almost like Morgoth's up here. Why don't you build up here? Like, and so anyway.
Yeah. Well, they'll both come into play. Morgoth thinks that the lords of the Noldor are just kind of Noldor are just kind of wandering abroad, and that they're not thinking about war. So he starts gathering his strength, and there's earthquakes in the north and fire coming from the mountains and fissures and the earth. And the orcs are poured forth across the plain of Argalen. So they're coming out of Angband. They came down the pass of Sirion in the west, and then they burst through the land of Maglor. However, Fingolfin and Maedhros are not asleep. They are not stupid, and they come upon the main host from both sides as it was assaulting Dorthonion, and they defeat them and destroy them completely.
Pull up the map real quick. I want to show, yeah. So, Maedhros has taken the east side, and then Fingolfin is still around over here, I believe. And so they come down in to attack. You said Doriath or Dorthonion. So they come in to attack Dorthonion.
They come on both sides. So
and
Fingolfin's over here, Maedhros over here.
And so they're able to just So Morgoth once again attacks, and nothing happens.
It's so interesting because Morgoth is so powerful, but he's still not coming out. He's not coming to do these attacks. He's sending.
To show how powerful these elves from Valinor are, though, at this time still.
How powerful and strong they are. This was the third great battle of the Wars of Beleriand, and it was named Dagor Alglareb, the Glorious Battle. So battles are still coming. This made the Noldor actually strengthen their watch. I am so impressed how smart they are. They aren't like, oh, we defeated them, we are just gonna relax. No, they strengthened their watch. The orcs of Angband were afraid to venture out. The Noldor knew they could not capture Angband or the Silmarils, so it's still a time of just holding their own. They're not going to be going and attacking. Morgoth does send orcs out to capture some elves. He tortures them, and he does learn more about why Fëanor came into Middle Earth, and he rejoices in the rebellion of Fëanor and thinks that there's a lot of dissension among his foes, where I feel like there's less dissension than Morgoth thinks there is. So when nearly 100 years pass, Morgoth does get brave again. He tries to take Fingolfin at unawares. They enter into the realm of Hithlum from the west, and they were obviously seen because Fingolfin was aware of them. Fingolfin fell upon Fingon, his son, fell upon them among the hills, and most of the orcs were driven to the sea. Remember, the orcs are very afraid of water, and so that probably was very scary for them. Morgoth perceived that the orcs unaided. He kind of resolves that, they're no match for Noldor. He needs a new plan. So, after another 100 years, a creature comes forth named Glaurung, the first of the Urloki, the fire drakes of the north. What is Glaurung?
Well, he's a fire drake.
What's a fire drake? I didn't know what a fire drake was until I read the chapter.
Yeah. It's a little bit more of a ground-bound dragon.
Yeah, it says that the elves fled. He came in the night. The elves fled before him to Ered Wethrin and Dorthonion. Fingon rode against him with the archers on horseback, and Glaurung could not withstand the arrows that he was getting hit by, and so he did end up fleeing back to Angband and never came forth for many years. So Morgoth even sent a dragon, but my thought is, why send one dragon? Why don't you send the Balrogs and the dragons and the orcs and the wolves, and then maybe you could defeat them? I don't know what his thinkings are.
So he gets mad at the fire drake there. So
Morgoth does?
Yeah, so I guess it is. I'm just looking. It looks like the fire drakes are dragons, fundament. And so this fire drake shows himself. So this ends up being a 400-year siege that's happening. And so Morgoth is like building these secret creatures, and this one fire drake comes out and shows himself way too early before he's ready. Mm-hmm. And so the elves get an idea of like there's more power coming from back there, and they also learn how to defeat one. So Morgoth's actually somewhat frustrated with this creature for going out mm-hmm. and fighting.
For revealing itself.
Yeah, so he was not actually trying to attack, but Morgoth was not, but the fire drake decided to go do it.
So there was peace after this for almost 200 years. Behind the guard of the armies, in the north, the Noldor started building their dwellings and their towers. In many parts of the land, the Noldor and the Sindar elves started becoming one people, speaking the same tongue. The Noldor always had a greater power of mind and body than the Sindar, but the Sindar did have fairer voices. So they're kind of becoming one people, and I think in the end, they kind of do become one people after thousands of years. So that ends chapter 13. Any comments, and please share what we are supposed to read for next week.
No, actually, my last comments were just going to be about the Siege of Angband, how it's like both sides have decided this is going to be, we're playing the long game, and when you can't die, like 400 years doesn't seem like that long a deal, I suppose. So nothing new other than that. Basically, just this is what they've kind of set up with the elves have kind of surrounded Morgoth, and Morgoth is like, okay, how do I need more powerful creatures to beat the elves? And kind of everyone's in a stalemate right now.
So what chapters do we need to read for our next episode?
We are going to be doing chapters 14, 15, and 16.
Yes. It's a little bit longer, but chapter 14 is pretty much just telling us where people are. It's not very much story. So we think we'll just show a map and kind of point to different places. Kind of important if you watch, then listen maybe this time. So read chapters 14 through 16. I did have a couple questions for you. This first question is, how does the creation of the sun and moon change the rhythm and the mood of the world compared to the two trees of Valinor? What's positive? What's negative? Or what feels lost?
It seems like, I mean, I've always correlated to, because I think it's very important for Tolkien's universe, light and time, and so I think time is a lot different. Seems like, especially the growth that it's experienced when you now have the sun and moon, that changes things. Things go a lot faster, and then you obviously have the introduction of men who are very time bound in terms of years as well. So I think that's a big deal. And then obviously, you get the orcs now are scared of the sun too. So you really have the light versus darkness shown.
Yeah, I feel like it really sets up the preparation, Iluvatar's preparation for men. I don't think men could live in the unendless days and be just excited by the stars. I think they get pretty bored.
That would be difficult to relate to those characters. I feel like it's
very much for the men. It's kind of interesting actually, and for Morgoth, and to try to hold him off, something a little bit something he's afraid of, the sun.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how the time changes so much. My other question, we kind of alluded to asking it in the last episode, and it was about leadership and what is Tolkien saying about a good leader or a bad leader, maybe in comparison. I think if you look at maybe Fëanor and his son Maedhros, or Fëanor and Fingolfin with his sons, saving Maedhros.
Well, I think it's going to be, honestly, Fëanor was quite the leader. He got everyone to just leave their homes and follow him. So
he was a successful leader, yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting. Depends on how you determine leadership there, but it does seem like there's definitely different characters there in terms of there's that big division you've created when you burn the ships and you leave Fingolfin and his men behind. And so that has to get healed. And so seeing them healing it, because they realize we're going to be living together for the rest of eternity, as far as they can tell, because they don't die. We have to find out how to live together. And so you have leaders that are a little bit more diplomatic in their thinking, and have more ideas other than killing Morgoth, but have ideas like, well, we're still bound to kill Morgoth, but we can do a lot of other things, a lot of other good in the meantime.
Yeah, I think that Fëanor was successful, but it does depend on. He was he was a talented leader. I don't think he was a good leader. I think he led by force and fear. But it worked. People listened to him. But even people listened to him, but a lot less people followed him into Middle Earth than they followed Fingolfin. I think they could see that Fëanor was kind of like a bomb that might go off. And
I think Fingolfin was the king of the Noldor, since Finwë kind of relinquished that title when he went.
Fëanor would have been
and hid.
Oh, you mean the king after Fëanor got
exiled to Formenos? So Fingolfin was actually kind of the acting ruler of the Noldor for a while. So he would have more supporters. Would make sense.
More followers.
Yeah.
I do think Fëanor's pride in wanting to try to kill Morgoth did get him killed.
I 100% agree. 100% agree.
But he did have some sons that were able to take on his leadership.
But really, he's really mad. He got stolen from. He's so crazed for these Silmarils. He is killing. He is leading his people to a lot of death. He's having a lot of success against orcs and whatnot, but it's all for his specific lust for these Silmarils.
Yeah, and I think the oath will bring along more death,
which is what Mandos prophesied.
Yeah. So that's all I had. Interesting chapter there at the end. Just learning how the Noldor are trying to fit into Beleriand. But That's it. That's all I had.
Yeah, I think just the other notes that we talked about is like mankind enters and they're in the east part of Middle Earth when they start, and then obviously we kind of get a feeling for Galadriel too in terms of how that relates to Lord of the Rings. Elrond is mentioned.
Oh yeah,
We don't know a
Elrond's
whole lot
mentioned as
more
half
about
elf.
that yet, but that's kind of some of the connections to Lord of the Rings. Don't think I have anything else.
Okay, chapters 14 through 16.
A Couple of Silmarils out.